Today's gospel passage is one that is very, very familiar to some of us. It may be new to some others who are here today, but it's clearly Jesus' most famous passage about being a neighbor. And when we hear or read the Bible, those of us who have been reading it for years and years and years, it's very important that we try, when we come to a biblical text, to hear it or to see it as if for the first time, without assuming, because you know what happens when you assume. We don't want to assume that we already know everything that a passage is about because we know it so well. We always want to be open. I always want to be open to that there is new light waiting to break forth from God's Word if we have ears to hear and eyes to see. So let's open ourselves to what God may wish to say to us this morning through this text. Listen to Luke chapter 10, beginning at verse 25. Just then, a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" He answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this, and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, 'Take care of him, and when I come back I will repay you whatever more you spend.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" He said, The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." This is such a great story. So let's start at the beginning. Just then, a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. Bad idea. Whenever people test Jesus in the Gospels, they're always the ones who end up being tested. It's their hearts, it's their motives that are revealed. The lawyer in this case that means he's an expert in the law of Moses, and he's coming to test Jesus. And as a pastor, I can tell you, it stinks when people do this. There is a difference between people who are truly seeking truth and understanding and wisdom and want to learn and to grow, and a person who is smug and arrogant and not open to learning or changing his or her mind, who merely wants to test you to see if you agree with their opinion, which they are already 100% convinced is the only and correct one. And that's what the lawyer is doing with Jesus. The lawyer asks him, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus knows this is a lawyer, so he answers the lawyer with a question of his own. As a good rabbi, you answer a question with a question. So he says to him, what is written in the law? What do you read there? This is a way of Jesus saying to the man, aren't you an expert in the scriptures? What do they say? And so the lawyer very successfully mentions from memory the need to love both God and neighbor found in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5 and Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. The lawyer already knew the answers. Why is he asking Jesus a question when he already knows the answers? And Jesus says to him, you have given the right answer. Do this, and you will live. Now, what's important to note here is that it's not enough, spiritually speaking, to intellectually know the right answer. It's not enough to be able to quote the Bible. It's not enough to say, this is really important. It's not enough to say, I believe something is true. Asking questions with no intention of implementing or carrying out the answer is not the right way to live. And anyone who claims to be a Christian, but whose life is totally lacking in Christ-like behavior or the fruit of the Spirit, is not likely truly a follower of Christ, no matter how vociferously they claim to be one. Jesus says to the man, do this and you will live. Do love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. Do love your neighbor. And the man, seeking to justify himself, says, well, who's my neighbor? Now this means, justify himself means to show himself as righteous or acceptable to God. If the lawyer was sincere, why doesn't he say, thanks for letting me know I'm on the right track, Jesus. I'll strive with my whole being to love God with all my heart, soul, strength, and mind, and to love my neighbors and to love everyone I meet, starting with my neighbors who live right beside me, who I see all the time. Thanks for the help. Why doesn't he say that? Because he has no intention of doing it. And what he's rather doing is he's looking to limit the span of care that he has to extend. I want to know, what's the minimum I have to do, Jesus, to be acceptable? What's the least amount of compassion, pity, mercy, and love I have to share with the fewest number of people possible? Who is my neighbor? How would you answer that question? Is it someone who lives close to you in physical proximity to you? Is it someone who shares a similar faith or cultural background? Is it only people who share your particular worldview? Who is your neighbor? What if Jesus means our actual neighbors? What if he means the people who live right beside us and across the street and across our backyard? Well, Jesus, as he so often does, he answers a question by telling a story. And in the story, we meet several characters. The first character we meet is a man, who could be anyone, who is going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. And that's about a 17-mile journey. It's a significant drop in elevation. It drops about 3,000 feet. So it's nice. You're going downhill. And the road between the cities was notoriously dangerous. The man could be anyone. He is just a random victim, an innocent victim of random violence and brutality. The next characters we meet are the robbers, who strip him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. And the robber's approach to life is very simply summed up: what's yours is mine, and I'm going to take it. What's yours is mine, and I'm going to take it. And the one thing I'll at least give the robbers credit for is they have the courage to confront someone face to face. You have to try to look for something redeeming in just about everybody. No, because there are many ways people rob. People can rob and steal with this attitude of what's yours is mine and I'm going to take it. People can steal money, but they can also steal a reputation. They can rob from future generations. Behind what's yours is mine and I'm going to take it is a callousness toward others, a selfishness that acts only for one's own immediate interest and a willingness to engage in brutality and violence to get whatever one wants. Needless to say, this is not the approach to life that Jesus advocates. So after the man and the robbers, then we hear that by chance a priest was going down the road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And so likewise a Levite, when he saw him, passed by on the other side. And the priest in the story represents the highest religious leadership among the Jews. The Levite was a designated lay associate of the priest. So the priest and the Levite, these are religious leaders who've got a good knowledge of God's laws. They certainly know about loving God and loving our neighbor. But they do nothing for the man lying on the side of the road. Maybe they were conflicted about what to do. Perhaps, the body was planted by robbers to stop and distract a traveler who they then could attack. Maybe they were scared of being victimized themselves. If the man was dead, then contact with a corpse would have prevented them from being able to carry out their religious duties for a time. If I had been late for church this morning because I was driving down Route 137 and I saw somebody on the side of the road and went, oh my goodness, and pulled over and put him in my car and took him to the hospital, and I just didn't make it here, some of you might have been okay with that. Might have said, oh, it's nice that the pastor did something Jesus would like. And others of you would have been, how come he wasn't here doing his job? Well, that's what the Levite and the priest, it's important to acknowledge, hey, maybe that's part of what they were thinking about in their head. And sometimes it's hard to choose between two things when they both seem important. So we want to be careful not to be too quick to condemn the priest and the Levite, because if we're honest, none of us knows how we would actually respond in a stressful situation. We don't know until we're in them. We all like to imagine that we'd be courageous and brave and all that, but unless you've been in a notoriously dangerous place and seen someone on the ground unresponsive, or been in another situation like that, you truly don't know what you would do. It would have been nice if the priest and Levite had stopped and helped the man, but they chose safety and security and, if we're honest, fear over the risk of showing mercy and courage. They passed by and went on their way. And the approach to life of the priest and the Levite can be summed up very simply as, what's mine is mine, and I'm going to keep it. And this is the approach to life and the attitude of many people. What's mine is mine, and I'm going to keep it. I take care of myself. Other people should take care of themselves. What happens to other people, it's not my business and it's not my concern. Everyone should look out for themselves. I don't think that's the approach Jesus is advocating either. The final person we meet in the story is a Samaritan, a person from the province of Samaria. In Jesus telling this story to a bunch of Jewish people, this is a surprise. You would expect in the pattern of storytelling that at the first was a priest, then was a Levite, so you're waiting, you expect Jesus to say, then an ordinary Israelite. That's, what you would think. So Jesus, boom, here's the twist in the story. And the relationship, in case you didn't know, between the Jews and the Samaritans was similar to any relationship in the world today, marked by strong racial or cultural prejudice. The Jews considered the Samaritans to be social outcasts, untouchable, racially inferior, and practicing a false religion. Other than that, they liked them. They avoided any association with Samaritans. They traveled long distances not to pass through a Samaritan area. Any physical contact, like drinking water from a common bucket, eating a meal, God forbid, with a Samaritan, would make a Jewish person ceremonially unclean, unable to participate in worship at the temple for a period of time. Well, you can imagine how the Samaritans responded to this treatment. They, quite naturally, responded with a very strong dislike and hatred for the Jews. And so understanding this cultural prejudice makes the end of Jesus' story all the more surprising. It's a Samaritan. It's a foreigner. not expected to show sympathy to Jews, who is moved with pity and shows mercy. Now, because the phrase Good Samaritan has become almost universally known as a way to describe someone who helps a stranger in need, we've lost some of the shock value of this parable. You have to imagine the hero of the story being the last person that you personally would ever see as a hero. So I need you to imagine an individual or the type of person you most personally dislike, who you have the greatest amount of disdain for, or maybe the person you fear the most. Can you picture that person in your head? Because that's the person Jesus says is moved with pity. Can you imagine someone whose worldview is the exact opposite of yours being the hero of Jesus' story? Because that's who, Jesus says, delayed his own journey, risked danger to himself, expended great energy, spent 2 days' wages with the assurance of more, and promised to follow up on his commitment, was someone who was ceremonially unclean, socially an outcast, and religiously a heretic. Boom! Because when we begin to grasp how that feels, then we can start to understand how it felt to the lawyer. Then you can start to understand how it would have impacted those who first heard Jesus tell this story. And in the story, just so there's no mistake, Jesus very clearly says that the priest, the Levite, and the Samaritan all saw the man. So there's no giving the priest and the Levite a pass because, well, maybe they didn't see him. Maybe they weren't aware of him. They saw him and chose to pass by on the other side. They didn't even go near him. They chose not to get involved at all. And when the Samaritan saw him, we're told that he was moved with pity and he went to him. And the difference among all the characters in the story is that only one was moved with pity. Only one acts out of a deep sense of compassion and love and mercy. And the Samaritan's approach to life is, what's mine is yours and I'm going to share it. What's mine is yours and I'm going to share it. And this is the attitude Jesus is hoping to cultivate in all of us. The Samaritan demonstrates mercy, compassion, courage, a willingness to risk, and generous love. He is an admirable person. And he puts oil and wine on the man's wounds to soften them and to cleanse them. He bandages the man up. He puts him on his own animal. He brings him to the inn. He personally takes care of him. He gives 2 days' pay to the innkeeper. Says, take care of him. When I come back, I'll settle it all, whatever you spend. The Samaritan acts out of mercy and love without partiality, without preference, and expects nothing in return. So Jesus finishes telling this story, then turns back to the lawyer and asks him a question in response to his question. And who is my neighbor? And you notice Jesus changes the focus of the lawyer's question from, and who is my neighbor, to which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? And this compels the lawyer to answer a very different question than he wants to answer. And to give a reply very different than he'd like to, because it makes him commend a member of a race of people he despises. And he can't even bring himself to say the Samaritan. It just sticks in his throat. Can't get it out. And he finally has to just say, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus looks him in the eye and says, go and do likewise. Having the right answers and being able to quote the Bible like the lawyer in the parable doesn't mean one knows or obeys God. James tells us that demons believe in God and can quote the scriptures. Jesus is trying to get the man to change his approach to life, as well as all of us who hear this story. What's yours is mine, and I'm going to take it? No. What's mine is mine, and I'm going to keep it? No. What's mine is yours, and I'm going to share it. Which of these three approaches would Jesus say most accurately describes how we approach and live our life on a daily basis? Having compassion, practicing mercy, caring for others and sharing their problems, it lays the foundation for a meaningful life as a disciple of Christ, and not only as an individual, but as a family, for a neighborhood, for a community, and for humanity as a whole. And the power of this story consists in Jesus' choice of the character to illustrate the love of neighbor and the love of God. A Samaritan. The social boundaries of that time were clear and inflexible. A Samaritan would never have been considered a model of neighborliness or holiness. And yet that's precisely who Jesus lifts up. Because the rules in God's society are basically two. Love God and love your neighbor. But those two rules are different from the world in which we live. And living by them will call us to disregard a lot of other things our culture tells us, so that we can follow Jesus' example. I close with this thought. If you were the man in the parable who's stripped, beaten, and left for dead, how much do you think you'd care about the religion, nationality, or class of the person who showed you mercy? Just a thought. Well, we've been talking a lot about neighboring, and this morning we're going to be kicking off or introducing a whole focus for our church on the art of neighboring. And some quick background to this is 10 years ago, a group of 20 pastors in the Denver, Colorado area gathered to think and dream and pray about how they might join forces to impact their community. And they invited the local mayor, Bob Fry, and asked him how all the churches could best serve the city. And the mayor replied that the majority of the issues that our community is facing would be eliminated or drastically reduced if we could just figure out a way to be a community of great neighbors. And the pastors talked about the level of conviction that they felt because the mayor basically invited a room full of pastors to try to get their people to actually obey Jesus. To go out and love and be great neighbors. And so that started what has become a growing movement on the art of neighboring. And in the book of that title, they have a little grid, and hopefully all of you got one of these when you came in. If you didn't, make sure you get one from a worship welcomer when you come out. And one of the things they found when these pastors went back to their churches, and as they've shared this around the country, is that if you see your house and you think about your 8 nearest physical neighbors, so the people who live on either side of you, across the street from you, behind you, they asked their people, how many of these people do you know by name? And that's one thing. And then so line number 1 is, okay, I know the names of these people. You're right, their names. The second thing is, how much relevant information do you know about them from actually talking to them? So not they're the ones with the rose bushes in front of their house, because anybody could see that. Not they're the ones who drive the red car. Anyone could see that. But relevant information is, what do you know about them at all? Like, they work in Orleans, etc. So that's the number 2 on this sheet under each household. And then third is more in-depth information after you connect with someone and start getting to know. I mean, what do you know about their hopes, their dreams, their challenges? What might you be able to be praying for them about? So what we want to challenge every single one of us to do is I want you to put this somewhere you're going to see it every single day. So you put it on whatever door you go out of from your house most frequently. So you have a walk-in door to your garage that you go out to get the mail or the paper, stick it there. Put it on the door you just walk out of your house the most. Put it on your refrigerator. Wherever you go the most, wherever you're going to see it daily, as a reminder to yourself, am I filling in these boxes? And that takes time. This is a spiritual discipline. It takes an investment of time to start to get to know the people around you. And what you may find like Jill and I, we know some of our neighbors pretty well. But as our neighborhood keeps changing and people move in, move out, new people come, and you've got to keep doing this. So say we have 400-something people who come to worship at Brewster Baptist Church. What might be the impact in our communities if we could have 400-plus people who start intentionally, motivated by the love of Jesus, the love of God, and loving our neighbors? We just started to take some time to do this. You know what's one of the biggest problems we face in America right now? It's isolation. It's isolation and loneliness. You never know what you might find by sharing the love of Christ. So, let's get on it. You're going to hear about this all month, so I look forward to talking more about it. And I look forward to hearing stories from you about things you discover as you actually start to get to know your neighbors.